And I was asking you if the whole world now recognizes that the Netanyahu-Trump war has been a failure and they're not going to succeed in any of their goals.
Yes, I think that it is generally understood that the United States is weaker than it claims to be, that this is no longer a unipolar world, if it ever was one, that the United States grandiosity exceeds its reach. But the U.S. Foreign policy, and certainly the remarkable mediocrity of the politicians in Washington, has not come to grips with this new reality, the reality of a multipolar world. I think it's important to look back to the 1990s, actually, when the U.S. came to the view that it was all powerful and that its major goal was to prevent any even remote rival from gaining any kind of ascendancy. Russia was still the main country in view that should be held back. Iran was mentioned. China was not really the focus at that point, but of course became the focus by around 2010. But recall that the purpose of Zbigniew Brzezinski's famous book, The Grand Chessboard, in its subtitle was American Primacy. That is, America being number one in Eurasia, the great supercontinent of Europe and Asia. And that meant from the 1990s onward that the United States would brook no competition from any Eurasian power, whether it's Russia or China or Iran. Brzezinski wrongly wrote 30 years ago that the U.S. would be able to succeed in this goal because it was technologically far and away the most advanced country in the world, that it was economically the most powerful, financially the most powerful, so that it would be able to keep down any potential rival. Brzezinski also wrote that Russia, China, and Iran would never see fit to form a kind of a bloc to resist the United States, another very poor prediction of Brzezinski made 30 years ago. But the fact of the matter is American primacy was always exaggerated. The United States is 4.1% of the world population. The population of Eurasia is about 60% of the world. The idea that the United States can dominate Eurasia, which was the premise of U.S. foreign policy dating back to the 1990s, never made much sense, but it absolutely makes no sense today. But think of what we continue to do. We continue to have war against Russia, which is just bleeding Ukraine to its demise, actually. We continue to have a war for no reason against Iran because Israel and the United States decided that they would control Iran. They thought in utter delusion that one day of bombing and assassination of Iran's leadership on February 28th would enable Trump to pick the new leader of Iran. He said so himself. That's not a surmise from us. That was Trump's stated belief. And he learned soon afterwards it can't be done. He doesn't know what to do at this point because he's not clever enough to cut his losses and cut America's losses. So he continues to put the United States and the world at jeopardy. But the fact of the matter is the whole war was based on an absurd delusion, but the kind of delusion that fuels American foreign policy generally. And that delusion is the United States is all powerful, so it can do what it wants.
How do you account for President Trump's behavior? Now, we could stop right there. How do you account for his behavior in the past 2 weeks where he did the same thing twice? threatened a serious, serious bombing. Once was used that phrase, the gates of hell, and then canceled. Second week, he said the heaviest bombardment since World War II, and then he canceled. Do his advisors and he, as far as you can tell, honestly believe that these threats have an effect on the Iranian government? I would think it goes in one ear and out the other.
Well, it certainly has no effect at all. And Trump is a very impetuous and not very clever person who was deeply frustrated. He led the United States into absolutely absurd and costly dead end. Iran has a credible deterrence. If the United States were to do what Trump claims every other day, Iran would have the ability to destroy much of the Middle East infrastructure, including Israel's infrastructure. This is known. This has been said by American military leaders, no less. So Trump is fulminating. He doesn't want to look like a loser, but he put the United States into an absolutely untenable position. And because Trump is Trump, he's impetuous, he's not bright, he has gotten the United States into a mess. He doesn't quite know how to get out of this mess, and we see very erratic rhetoric and very erratic action. I have a very simple solution, in my view, which is the United States should just leave. It doesn't need any kind of agreement with Iran. Trump can declare victory. He can declare the greatest victory in the history of the world if he wants to. That's just fine with me. But the United States should just leave, knowing that Iran has absolutely no reason to continue any kind of military actions if the United States leaves. Iran actually wants to reestablish normal relations with the neighboring Arab countries in the Gulf. If the United States just stops what it is doing, Iran will not press the advantage in any way. Iran will breathe a sigh of relief. The Strait of Hormuz will open. Oil prices will come back down. The fighting will stop. Iran will seek to reestablish relations with the Saudis and others. Yes, the United States will be exposed for what it really is, which is, I wouldn't say a paper tiger, but I would say a country that has vastly exaggerated its prerogatives. And most of the world knows this by now, so better stop the shooting before impetuosity ends up destroying the world and further destroying American credibility and American security. In other words, when you're in a deep hole, stop digging,
right.
Or cut your losses after you've made a terrible mistake. Trump, of course, is succumbing to the fallacy of sunk costs. He's gotten the United States into a mess, and he's determined to salvage that, but can't.
Chris, that's a full screen. Here's what he said yesterday. Now, I've never seen this phrase before, Jeff. I assume you can see it from where you are. The USA is locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran at levels of, here's the phrase that's new to me, military terror, strength and power not seen since World War II. So he uses this phrase, military terror, and then backs down. This is the second backing down. But you're of the view that he's confabulating. He's making these things up and persuading himself that he has the ability to do this, and it's at odds with reality.
Well, I don't have any guarantee that he won't try, by the way. That would be consistent with the American blunders and the American-led disasters that have littered the scene for decades. So
Right.
I'm not saying that he won't try. I'm saying that he can't succeed. If the United States were to do these terrible things, Iran would do terrible things in response. And the United States would not succeed in achieving its political or military aims. It would succeed in escalating a crisis to the point of a worldwide catastrophe. You can't rule that out
Right.
with a president like Donald Trump.
You know what
But
you also can't rule out? Chris, if you want to put that up on the screen again, and this is what I thought when I saw military terror, Jeff, nuclear weapons. That's what I thought he was threatening.
again, you can't rule out anything with Trump. I hope that that's not what's being threatened. I'm sure that most of the advisors around him would be aghast at that suggestion. Trump has backed down repeatedly. I praise him for doing so. I don't want to egg him on. I would like the United States simply to go home.
One last subject matter was your other field of expertise. How unstable is the international economy, given what has happened with the Strait of Hormuz and given inflation factors compounded by tariffs now in the United States?
Well, let's distinguish two things. One is the situation of the U.S. economy, and the second is the potential for a global crisis. When it comes to the global massive crisis first, that would occur if Trump were to actually carry out one of these threats. In other words, if Trump were to escalate and carry out this military terror, and Iran were to respond as it would, this could result in a global economic catastrophe. That's quite possible. It doesn't take much to send oil prices back to $100, and if they actually carried out the things that Trump has threatened, it would go far beyond that, and it would have a global effect.
I've been asking this question of my guests this week. Is Israel a threat to the national security of the United States?
Yes, because Israel and Israel's backers in the United States have put the United States repeatedly into wars that we should not be fighting, that therefore endanger U.S. lives, endanger the allied countries of the United States, threaten the world economy, and run up a debt in the United States that now totals probably around $10 trillion of all the wars that we have fought in the last 25 years, many of which have been at Israel's behest. So in this sense, Israel is not aligned with U.S. national security. And we should recognize that basic fact and act on the basis of international law and U.S. national security. And this would mean finally telling Israel to stop its rogue behavior.
Last week, when President Netanyahu was in the United States ostensibly for the funeral of Senator Lindsey Graham, he did, of course, spend some time in the White House, both at a public meeting and a private meeting. Haaretz, the English language Israeli media site and publication that you and I frequently consult, says that Netanyahu came home empty-handed. It points out that no American official greeted him at the airport and no American official was there when he left. Yet Netanyahu told Fox News the evening of his two meetings with President Trump that it was the best conversation he had ever had with Trump. How do you read all this?
Well, I think in states, senior apparatus, there is awareness that this Iran war, which was pushed by Netanyahu, has been a debacle. There is awareness that the Gaza massacres by Israel have threatened the U.S. Credibility and position in the world, because the United States has been complicit in what is, in effect, a genocide. That Israel's invasion of Lebanon has further destabilized the region. All of this is well understood. I think probably, I'm just guessing, Trump would like Israel to behave in another way. He's given that indication once in a while. But clearly, U.S. policy is deeply structured in line with Israeli wants, and that has been true for decades, and it's not changing suddenly. So I think that there's a lot of frustration, perhaps, because none of this is working to Trump's
Mr. Sachs, I think we have lost you. What, Jeff? Are you still there?
I am, yeah. I'm sorry about the low bandwidth here.
This is not your fault. I'm just wondering if we should continue or resume it tomorrow. You were finishing up, I think, explaining the reluctant but realistic attitude. I'm summarizing what I thought I heard you say of Trump about Netanyahu. Is Netanyahu on his way out? Is he sort of a loser in Trump's mind?
I think the thing to understand about American foreign policy and Israeli foreign policy, for that matter, is that it's pretty deeply entrained. This is not changing by the day or by the whims of Trump or Netanyahu or even the elections in Israel. The patterns that we have of Israeli behavior and American foreign policy are rather consistent. The words may change, the rhetoric may change, but the United States has been pretty much in perpetual war in the Middle East since 2001. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Iran. That's not going to change. That's been true of all recent presidents. And it will be true if Netanyahu loses the election in October, because he'll be replaced by another right-wing Israeli government. So this is not something that is changing by the day or because Trump says one thing or another. This is pretty deeply entrenched. The American people are reacting increasingly strongly against it. One election after another, the primary in recent weeks have all been running against Israel. And I think that trend is likely to continue in the Michigan primary and elsewhere. The American people are sick of these wars. But the American military-industrial complex, which runs American foreign policy, is still pretty much in the same direction. Nothing fundamental has changed so far, in my view.
Okay. Moving on to Russia. Is it the public policy of the United States government to crush or dissolve or dismember Russia?
Well, it is a desire of the American military-industrial complex and has been since 1991 to do what it can to weaken Russia, if possibly divide Russia, if possible to provoke some kind of political change in Russia to bring in a U.S. subordinated government. These have all been the intentions and the desires of the United States. They're not achievable. They're not achievable in the same way that the United States desires regime change in Iran, but that's also not achievable. So I think we have to distinguish between the intentions and desires of American foreign policy and what can really be achieved. That gap is the gap between want and actuality that often means the United States finds itself or puts itself into useless, expensive, reckless wars that last for many, many years because of the lack of realism of American foreign policy. But you asked the question, is it the aim or desire or goal of the United States to weaken Russia, to divide it, to break it apart? Yes, absolutely. This was spelled out in the 1990s, and nothing has changed since then. It's the same goal with Iran, to have regime change. It's the same goal with China, to weaken or contain China. But none of these goals is achievable.